So, in terms of kind of what I was discussing earlier about moral codes and ethics, and where that comes from, this idea that if humans didn't have religion, how could we learn morals? Um, these are based on the species surviving through a stronger social bond, and this is kind of where I like to discuss our the four levels of empathy that humans tend to have. There's been a lot of recent studies with chimps, bonobos, and human infants. Um, we tend to have the cooperative, collaborative gene, aka the teaching gene, and learning. Other primates do not. This is what's really made it successful. We tend to avoid conflict rather than go towards it. Um, and the four levels of empathy kind of go along with that, to be honest. So the first is cognitive empathy, which is knowing how others feel. This could be that like somebody trips and falls and hurts their knee, and you've done that before, so you understand what that feels like. Emotional is feel physically along with others, as if emotions are contagious. Sometimes this would be somebody who's watching a movie or a TV show, and you're kind of moved by what's going on to the point where you like start to kind of cry. Um, Compassionate is feel genuine concern at the same time you feel moved to help people. So there's a whole nother level. You may like see somebody crying, and you may feel with them, and you may like start to cry, but until you actually go over there and actually discuss with them, or talk with them, or try to help them, you're not utilizing what we call compassionate empathy. Altruism is the last and final form of empathy, and it is self-sacrifice. This is the idea that the 18-year-old football star jumps in front of a train to save grandmother, and dies. This makes no biological sense. So altruism really doesn't make biological sense, right? Grandma has already had children. Um, Football player hasn't. And if biology and natural selection in terms of reproduction are important, then it doesn't really make sense. And this is, self-sacrifice, bodily harm, uh, um, to yourself, even though you don't know these people. So these are the four levels of human empathy. And this is really where the moral code is coming from, is out of this piece. This is biological. This is inside of us. We don't need to be taught these things necessarily. Um, uh, Empathy tends to be kind of uh, with us early on. And then culture can kind of move that in a more empathetic way or move it in a less empathetic way. I'd say that in the United States, we have a bunch of cliche sayings and kind of move away from empathy and try to create more, what I call, like, at least in the male kind of side of things, more of a warrior class. And this is important in places like Sparta and some of these other warring societies, where you didn't want your warriors to have a bunch of empathy, otherwise they wouldn't have been good warriors. So some fascinating things around kind of human empathy and the biological component, and where really, if you have a group of people that doesn't have this specific religion, where are they getting their moral code or their ethics from? And it's out of this. World religions. Here's the breakdown of percentages. This is a few years old now, but still pretty decent in terms of overall list. You can see Christianity there with 33.4% of the world population. Islam's 22.7, Buddhism 6.8, Hindu 13.8, other religions 10.9. So this could include Taoism and some of these other ones. Non-religious, you're looking at 9.7%. These could be what we would call agnostic people that maybe don't have a religious leaning, are anti-religion, but kind of are like whatever, don't care. Atheists are more anti-God, more anti-religion, because they don't see it as necessary or functional, 2%. Sikhs is a combination of Hinduism and Islam, and we're looking at 0.4%. Judaism, 0.2%. And Bahia is basically a church, 0.1%, formed in the Middle East of like a union of all religions can go there. So Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, those are kind of the religions that we are most aware of, because of the biggest ones. Um, so again, this isn't necessarily like a religion course. So Hinduism is considered polytheistic, where they have multiple gods in a pantheon. Buddhism is kind of an interesting one. It doesn't really have a God. It's more of kind of oneness with the universe and nirvana, enlightenment, peace. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all share the same monotheistic God. Different prophets, different creation stories in terms of where they derive from, but that is the general kind of lumping of deities within that group. African religions and revitalization movements. Your book discusses these. These are quite fascinating and interesting. The Coptic Church and Rastafarianism comes out of that. Those are some to kind of research and look up. Cargo cults is another term that you're going to want to know. Melanesia in response to World War II and Western trade goods, ultimately like Japan and the US would show up with these large cargo ships and or planes. And cultural leaders believed that not only would the cargo ships bring goods, but also dead ancestors as well. So because they were these Western and Japanese kind of cargo ships were bringing in all these goods like food and cigarettes and all these amazing things that were totally new to all these people, by the way. They believed that also maybe they had kind of their ancestors in there. So what they would do is they start to form this neo kind of symbolic ritualization and prayer around ushering in their dead relatives, to the point where they would start building kind of wooden planes and ships and worship them, hoping that that would bring in their dead ancestors. This is a fascinating kind of modern technology age meets kind of hunter-gatherer groups, and what that does to the kind of supernatural and religious beliefs. Sacred sites we already touched on in terms of sacred environmental locations. The UN Declaration of Human Rights, religious freedom. This is part of the UN Charter in terms of human rights. So having religious freedom is part of that. Again, I think earlier we got into some controversial topics. So religious freedom until it kind of has some of these other things that we start to maybe judge as wrong or bad. However, we're supposed to be protecting kind of the religious freedom around the world through the UN. But remember, the UN doesn't really have it doesn't have a military arm or anything like that in terms of controlling people who aren't. So there's still groups that are being persecuted over religion. And really, again, the UN doesn't have that military kind of force arm that they would need to ensure that this is happening. Lastly, in terms of papers, conferencing with the instructor, I do recommend that you guys email me. I've emailed plenty of you back and forth, whether or not the event or the people you want to interview or the topic is good or you're on the right track. I will continue to do so. Please email me. I usually email back very quickly, unless I'm on the road or kind of weekend time period. Sometimes I'm a bit busy. Other tasks. Questions I would ask for you currently is, what is your theoretical orientation? So this is usually where a lot of people miss points. You're going to want to really state out factually that you are looking at your event and kind of phenomenon using a specific theoretical orientation like functionalism, symbolic interpretive, postmodern, structuralist. Probably shouldn't use cultural evolution because it's so flawed. But again, some of those things, Bourdieu's theory of practice, everyday life, anthropology of policy. There's a ton now that we've kind of gone over. Remember, I need 5 I need 5 sources, and these need to be academic journal sources. You're going to want to use the library database page on that one to look around your topic. Use those academic journals. Wikipedia is not an appropriate source. So again, academic journals and or academic books is what you are allowed to use. In-text citations are required. So again, if you're doing direct quotes, you're going to want to use in-text citations. If you don't know what APA formatting looks like, you're going to want to go on the library webpage. They pretty much have tutorial kind of versions of what that looks like. And then please ask questions about the process. There's been plenty of kind of postings around your research paper. In fact, this week It is a requirement to post on your research paper to me what you're doing, and it's worth 1 point, so 1% of your grade. So make sure that you guys complete that. All right, all. Please, again, email me with any questions, comments, and or concerns. Have a great week.